I've been out of it comatose, but the depression is over. I bottled up so much rage, but the zen calls as I turn the page.
Hello and welcome to Wildfire Gaming, the greatest channel with under 150 subscribers. This is SlowBurne, and I'm coming at you today with a little bit of an interesting development, a new idea from Wildfire Gaming. Uh, what I would want to do here is I want to start a new podcast that ideally I will upload every single week, weekly uploads to the channel and maybe elsewhere. I'm definitely exploring the idea of uploading the podcast to major podcasting networks, Spotify, Apple, and the like. This podcast will be led by me, SlowBurne. Andrew Burnes is my real name. TreeTrunkSean will be on as much as he wants. But I also have other ideas for guests that I'd like to have on, uh, including my wife, some of my friends, people in my family. I think there's a lot of people that could I can have some interesting conversations with that all kind of fold into this idea that I have here for the podcast. The idea for the podcast, it's going to be called Controlled Burn, trying to keep in theme with Wildfire Gaming and my last name. Uh, the reason that I'm doing it, as you can probably tell if you're a fan of Wildfire Gaming, one of the few who are out there, the channel kind of go ebbs and flows between mostly being dormant at this point to we had a resurgence in late 2022 that went on into the first half of 2023. And beyond here and there, like maybe I'll do a stream to do various things. I did the stream month or two, I guess it was a couple months ago now, where I was doing the speed run for the Platinum Trophy for Spyro the Dragon on the PlayStation 5. That was a lot of fun, but yeah, for the most part, there's no real consistent schedule at this point. And the reason that is just because me and TreeTrunkSean are just kind of in different places than we were when we started the channel. If you'll recall, back in 2015, 2016, and into 2017, we had very regular uploads. If you look at our channel history, we have a lot of videos because we uploaded all the time. But at that time, we just had a lot of time to do it. I mean, we were college roommates, we were seniors in college, and TreeTrunkSean in particular, I mean, he had like, if I remember his schedule, he can talk to about it whenever he's back on the channel, but I mean, he barely had anything going on at all. So he was basically doing a lot of the manpower behind the channel. And then we would just have recording sessions pretty regularly, and we would, just bang them out and stockpile them, and then he could edit them together and upload them. Um, so I mean, we just had a lot more time for that kind of thing. But now we obviously don't live together. It's been almost 10 years since Wildfire Gaming started, which is pretty crazy to think about. Sean and I are both married. Sean has a son. He has a kid that's again, he can kind of talk more about his family situation whenever he comes on the podcast, but I think he's at least two at this point. He's getting pretty old, and that's a definitely that's from what I understand, kids are kind of a handful at that age. Um, Also, Sean has a job that, as far as at least last time I checked in with him on that, it requires like a pretty insane commute. So that takes up a lot of his time. And then, he's probably pretty tired at the end of the day to really do anything else. And like I said, he was the one that was doing a lot of the editing for our channel. So this podcast is kind of my baby. It's going to be just me, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what the inspirations are here. I love podcasts. I don't really love podcasts in the sense of I listen to like a broad range of them, but the ones that I really like, I really get into and really, have listened to thousands of hours, no doubt, on my favorites. But beyond that, I like having an album of memories, like going back to old Wildfire Gaming episodes, and just I every once in a while I'll go back to our channel and watch stuff. Like I was playing some Pokemon not too long ago, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna have our gold and silver Nuzlocke just on in the background. And it was just there were so many times just even by myself where I was like laughing out loud at some of the things that we were saying. And it's just really cool to have like this kind of album of memories that that we have recorded through our channel. So even if not a single other person listened to or cared about this, it's almost like kind of like an audio diary in a way where it's just really fun to be able to go back and listen to this stuff. Now, just me talking by myself, that wouldn't be very interesting to go back and listen to. But like I said, we're going to mostly have guests on the podcast. And actually, we really wanted to have Sean on for this one, but like I said, he's just got a lot going on, and I wanted to. This is an idea that I've been sitting on, so I wanted to kind of get the ball rolling here. So yeah, this introductory episode is just me, but we're gonna have guests on. I think pretty much every episode. There might be some one-offs where it's just me if I'm going through a list or something like that. But the idea for the most part is for us to for us to have guests on. So inspirations for the podcast. I want to talk a little bit about my favorite podcasts and channels and things that I kind of want to emulate or at least kind of take ideas from. Definitely the number one, the medium, or the podcast that got me into the medium was the Game Informer show. This was going back when I first started listening to it. I think it was around 2017. So I had been a subscriber to Game Informer magazine since my grandfather bought me a subscription to the magazine for my 11th birthday. So that was March 2005. It's funny, I've actually been going back and reading old issues of Game Informer. I've been nostalgic for it ever since GameStop unfortunately closed them. I guess it's between a month and a couple months ago now. But even before that, I was actually going back and reading some old issues because I really love lists, and I had collected a lot of the issues that have lists in them, like the year-end lists and things of that, like, and then also like the top 300 games, top 200 games, top 100 RPGs, things like that. Um, and I was actually going back, and one of the issues that I picked up was my original. I don't have my original copy of that was my original issue, but I remembered it like yesterday, and I actually picked up a copy, and I've been reading through it. It was Condemned Criminal Origins was the cover. You can look it up. It's March 2005. And it's really kind of funny because the 360 hasn't been announced yet, and so they say that the game's going to be made for the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 2, which is funny. And actually, I was looking into that after I read through that cover story again, and never did end up did coming to the PlayStation 3, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, and like that, like reading through those old magazines has been really fun for me. But I've been reading Game Informer basically since that time, since 2005. There might have been some lapses in my subscription here and there, particularly toward the end when they tried to push everybody onto the digital version. But for the majority of the time, I was taking those magazines, and eventually kind of had to get rid of a lot of them. And my mom, she's moved a lot since, like, several times since I was in my childhood home, and so a lot of that stuff just kind of gets either thrown out or donated or whatever. Um, but I still have a pretty good collection that I've built up of the ones with lists and ones that are important to me, like have cool cover stories, and of course that first issue. But so I was a reader of the magazine, but and I think they actually started the podcast way back in 2009, but I wasn't at a time in my in 2009 I probably didn't even have Wi-Fi in my home. Like I lived in a very small town in Northeast Texas, and we were not very technologically advanced over in Leonard, Texas. So, yeah, I doubt that I even had Wi-Fi in my home yet at that point. But it was actually after I graduated college. So this is at post Wildfire Gaming. I discovered, I think the first piece of web content that I discovered for Game Informer was actually the replay show, which was kind of helmed by Andrew Reiner, and he was kind of my favorite host over there, and he had been a part of the magazine since 2005, and I just kind of got a kick out of reading his stuff for 2 decades at this point, but it was over a decade at that point. And somehow from there, just like YouTube, I think suggesting things kind of pointed me toward the Game Informer show podcast, which at that time was hosted by Ben Hansen. And so I fell in love with the Game Informer podcast. I listened to it every week, like religiously. And at that time, I really didn't listen to any other podcasts. It was really just the Game Informer show, but I was really attached to it. And, I would write in questions. And I remember one time I got email of the week. That was cool. And like I was living in Henderson, Texas at that time. And they like read, like, because in honor of me winning, like they read off some facts about Henderson, Texas. I only lived there for like 6 months, but it's kind of a funny memory. But yeah, so I was a big fan of the Game Informer podcast. And then, Game Informer started running into some trouble when GameStop was trying to cut costs, and they did a huge round of layoffs in 2019. And Ben Hansen was actually not affected by those layoffs, but he was personally affected in the sense that he was pretty pissed off about it. And so pretty quickly after that, he left Game Informer and started MinMax. And they've been doing that since I think October 2019 is when they started that. And so I've been listening to MinMax, from day one. I've been a Patreon supporter over there at MinMax pretty much the entire time. I've let it lapse here and there, but I always re-up it, and I am currently a Patreon supporter there. So MinMax is definitely, if I had to pick a favorite podcast, like just straight up podcast, it would still, I think, be my favorite. But my favorite outlet at this point, or channel, or whatever you want to call it, I think is Mystic Ryan. He is a really great PlayStation YouTuber that really, he leans heavily into the news side, but he does kind of some fun videos too. Like he does the, who's still online for PlayStation 3, and he's done, just kind of some fun projects here and there. And I really like those. Those are kind of my favorites. But every Friday he does Let's Talk PlayStation, which is just kind of a straight news show. And it's just, like I said, he's just a PlayStation guy, but he covers that kind of section of the business really, really well. And I've always been a PlayStation guy in the sense that my first video game console was a PlayStation 1. And that's always been kind of my main home console. I've usually had a Nintendo console as well. I skipped the Wii U, but I think I've had every Nintendo console since the GameCube. And then I've gone back and picked up the Nintendo 64 as well. And Xbox has always been kind of my third place, but I still, I skipped the Xbox 360 actually, which is kind of funny because that's the one that's the most popular, but I've had all of the other Xboxes. So, like kind of in the 360 era, I went back and bought an Xbox, which was like $50 at GameStop. And then I didn't get another Xbox until way down the line where I actually bought an Xbox One from my cousin Brett, who was selling his. And then I kind of use that as my Xbox 360 because you can play, a pretty healthy chunk of Xbox 360 games. And I didn't think I was going to buy a Series X, but I picked one up about a year ago. It was November, I think. I think it might have been around Black Friday when they were just selling them for just crazy cheap prices. Like I remember seeing a Series S at my Walmart for like $130. And I thought about that, but I not really because I always want to have access to physical media if I can, and especially since the main thing that I use an Xbox for at this point is just as a backwards compatibility machine. And so, I like being able to pick up like really cheap Xbox 360 discs and then putting them in there, and then they download the patch for the updated version or whatever. So I bought a Series X, and it was also heavily on sale at my Walmart. I picked it up for $350 with the disc, series full on Series X with the disc drive. It actually even came with Diablo 4, which I haven't played, but that's cool. And yeah, so mostly it collects dust, honestly. Like I don't really use it for much of anything, but if I ever get on a Halo kick, I love the Halo games, which is maybe a story for another time, but how I got into that series. But yeah, if I ever go on a Halo kick, then I'll get into that. But all that to say, PlayStation is my primary platform, and so I would like to sort of emulate what Mr. Grind does, where the way that he talks about current events in a really kind of straightforward way, and sort of boiling it down for people. But maybe broaden that out a little bit to not just covering strictly PlayStation. We'll see how that goes. And then most recently, I've actually been dabbling with Last Stand Media, Colin Moriarty's sort of podcasting network. I know that a lot of people kind of look down on Colin. He's definitely more on the conservative end of the spectrum. And he said some controversial things. I think like I don't know. It's been a long time at this point. I was looking into it. I think it's been not quite 10 years, but kind of around that time frame. And so I think he kind of had like a canceled effect in terms of video game media, since video game media is so on the left. But yeah, I've actually, what really turned me on to him was I was really frustrated by the lack of quality coverage when there was like this Xbox news breaking, where it was the first time they were really kind of caving in the sense that they were putting their games on PlayStation, right? So it was like those first 4 games at first, and then I think it's going to continue to snowball from there. But all the channels that I was looking at, like I tried to dip into Kind of Funny and even MinMax, like they were all like just kind of not really in-depth conversations. Like it kind of seemed like the people talking about them didn't really care about this news. But they, on Last Stand Media, they have an Xbox crew, they have a PlayStation crew, and they kind of came together to do like one big podcast where they talked about it from both angles, and that was like really interesting and compelling. And so from there, I've kind of listened to some of his stuff. To be honest, like they're a little bit dull to me. Like their podcasts are really long, and a lot of it is just them like just kind of rambling, which is not particularly interesting to me. But they when they really put their news hat on, or are really kind of honing in on a specific topic, I find that their stuff is quite good. So those are kind of the big influences I would say, or the things that I'm listening to at least, or my favorites that I would like to emulate in some ways. In terms of ideas for controlled burn, what I'd like to do, obviously a lot of what all the podcasts that I just listed off there are video game based, and I think this channel is definitely going to skew on the video game side. That is my favorite hobby and pastime. And so I have a lot of ideas to discuss with video games, and particularly lists. I make lists all the time, and at a certain point, I was like, I'm making all these lists, and I don't really have it to have anyone to share it with other than the people in my inner circle, my wife, my cousin Brett, Sean, my brother, people like that might be interested. But I think they're pretty well made and thought out lists that I think are, or at least would be fun to share into the ether there. So yeah, I've got some ideas for some lists. Definitely I'm going to do a series where I give my top 25 games, and people come on and sort of talk about theirs as well. And maybe we'll kind of keep those updated as we go, because that is something, at least for me, that's changing all the time. But yeah, yeah, I like that idea for lists. I have lists that are kind of more along the lines of like favorite consoles, favorite series, things like that, that I think would be really fun to get into. I've also got I think it would be fun to sort of talk about current events. So kind of what I was talking about at the top there with like what Mystic does, and to a degree, Last Stand Media. Like if anything breaking is going on, like I think it'll be worth it to sort of discuss in on the podcast. But beyond video games, I think it'll be fun to sort of dip into some other things too. I'm a really big music fan. I'm working on this huge project right now, which is the 500 greatest songs of all time. This is something that I've been working on off and on for like a decade at this point. And around the not it was definitely after the time that I got into reading Game Informer, but I got into reading Rolling Stone magazine, and I really was like that was my favorite magazine for a while. Eventually, they kind of fell off. Like they're a shell of their former selves at this point, and I don't really think it's a very good product anymore. It's not under the same ownership, and they don't have really the same writers that they did whenever I was reading them. But I still like really got into music, and getting my first iPod in like 2009. That was definitely a huge part of that. And before that, like my dad would like burn CDs and like curate CDs for me, and that was really awesome. So I definitely would like to talk a little bit about music on the podcast as well, and maybe some other entertainment related things. My wife Reagan and I are really into Game of Thrones, and that's kind of interesting. I think would be worth discussing. Um, there's also like this kind of interesting thing that we're doing where we're watching all of Star Wars in chronological order, and I'm trying to do like literally everything that is of any importance at all. So that means that we started with like I'm even kind of mixing in the Vision stuff from the that anime slash animation series that's on Disney Plus. But we went through the Acolyte, which was kind of interesting. Neither of us had any idea what to expect going into that show. We've watched through the first couple episodes, and then now we're deep in, well, not super deep, but in season 2 of the Clone Wars, which neither of us have seen before. And that's been kind of interesting, because it's been like, as a huge Star Wars fan, having not seen that, it seems like kind of one of those things where it's like something that I should experience. You know what I mean? So I think just like talking about our experiences going through Star Wars, like Reagan was not a Star Wars fan at all going into this relationship. And so that's been kind of interesting seeing her sort of react to this thing that I love so much. So that's kind of fun. But yeah, things like that too. I think that there's some other sort of interesting ideas that I have rumbling around back here that I think would be pretty interesting. But that's kind of the idea for Controlled Burn, this Controlled Burn podcast. I wanted to just kind of do a shorter episode here that was just me kind of laying out my ideas. And as always, feel free to comment here on this video. I'll also set up a email for people to write in if you are listening to the, if I end up putting this on Spotify and these other podcasting networks where you're not listening to it on YouTube, that you can kind of give me some feedback, or I'll take community questions as well. So if anybody wants to write in and have their questions or their comments read on the air, that's something that we can do. The email that I set up for the podcast is WFG, that stands for Wildfire Gaming, WFG Controlled Burn Podcast at gmail.com. So WFG Controlled Burn Podcast at gmail.com. That is our email address. So you can reach out to me there. And hopefully you find some of what we do here pretty interesting. I want to really explore this space, and if nothing else, I think it's something that's going to be fun for me to do. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen, and let's catch up down the road as I continue to post these episodes. Thanks.